stage, we are doing a multiplicity of points of view. And when you think about how theatre began, when you think about how it's been developed over the years, this idea of the multiplicity of points of view being embodied, not with the storyteller. You know, the storyteller's telling the story, but in the end there's only the storyteller. Even if he's putting on different voices, even if she's getting into different emotional states, you're not actually seeing the living exchange of human beings up there. But if you're doing Julius Caesar, you know that while Brutus and Cassius might be on the same side, they actually think about it very differently, and their motives for doing the assassination are very different. Even though they're on the same side, and then on the opposite side, Mark Antony and Octavius Caesar, and you can see, even within their initial interaction, what's going to happen in 20 years' time, and you're into Antony and Cleopatra. You can see it, you know, you can feel it. And then there's what Caesar doing on top of that, and what the hell's Casca doing, quite apart from the role of the women, and quite apart from the role of all those slaves that have to kill Brutus and Cassius and so on and so forth, because they've been commanded to do it. And so there are these thousands of stories in Shakespeare's plays, which means that we are getting a kind of rundown of human consciousness and multiplicity of points of view in our art form. And it's no surprise to me that the dean says, oh, well, I do science over here, and I just tuck Shakespeare in there so that people know that we actually do have the whole thing. I want to suggest to you that, in fact, one of the reasons why we can understand so many things is, in part, because we have the capacity to understand them. And I know if I could work at it more, I'd have the capacity to understand the internet better, but I never seem to have the hours to put it in there so I can get my brain to be charged again and understand all the connections. However, having said that, if you just look at that great shift that happened during the Renaissance, you know, why did we suddenly know that there were other countries, other worlds, other religions? Well, obviously one is the fall of Constantinople and the translations of all the books, and suddenly we get the Greek and Roman authors back. But even more importantly, in the crossover of science, you know, suddenly they can make instruments, because they're good at developing the scientific mind, to make instruments so that maritime exploration suddenly became a real possibility. And it's not a fluke that all those explorers like Drake and all those people were coming out of England at the same time Shakespeare's writing his plays. Do you understand me? Because that science allowed those ships to go where they were going, which in turn brought back all the ideas from the New World and from India and from the East. As they suddenly started having this cultural influx, there was a real interaction between those two things. And I think the dean was trying to name when arts and scientists at its best starts interacting, what my fear is that we're losing our language, that our children who are brought up just on Twitter and Facebook and open social networking so you're friends with everybody, but you haven't actually built any relationships with anybody, you know, and that the brains, the dendrites in the brain are being programmed one way, and actually that is not the way in which you deal with your deepest human relationships or where you're most in conflict. And you have to do the work human being to human being to actually understand what human relationships are about. You can't do it on the internet. We also have got ourselves to a place where, you know, we expect our politicians now that they're lying. Our assumption is, and most of the people, the kids in the schools, they pretty, you know, if a politician's speaking, then he's probably not telling the truth. or if a religious leader is, leading the way, good chance he's doing what he hates on the, what he says. I'm just thinking of the last one, homosexuality is terrible, bad, should be punished by God. And he's taking these teenage boys off with him on holiday and having sexual relationships and completely fucking up their lives because he doesn't have the beginning insight to admit his own humanity and accept his own homosexuality. Just drive me crazy. But we know that. Do you know what I mean? We know what it means to be a murderer because we play murderers. We know what it means to be confused about your sexuality because that's what we do. We know what it means to step out in front of people and say, this is what I think and feel, and I'm going to stand by my words and be strengthened by my words. But if we're living in a culture where we are not strengthened by our words, that we're actually using language to obfuscate. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. I think Bill Clinton in many ways is an admirable man. I could kill him for bloody well doing that with language. Being the lawyer, splitting the hair, thinking he could get away with it. What the fuck was he thinking? And it makes me mad when Barack Obama, who is a great speaker and has lived with the people in Chicago, does not say the way that it is, but is busy being the King James Bible, It's interesting. I'm so glad, Patrick. Where are you, Patrick? He's not listening to me. Oh, he's there. I thought he bloody snuck out. I am so glad you're doing the thing on the James Bible. And Adam Nicholson wrote a terrific book. I hope you're having him talk. Are you, Patrick? Anyway, he wrote a terrific book called God's Secretaries. And it's about the writing of the James Bible and the writing of King Lear. So one, Lear, about the universe falling apart and what are the ingredients for this universe to fall apart. And then the James Bible being commissioned by King James, who reckoned he was a peacemaker. As you all know, his mother was Mary, Queen of Scots, very Catholic. He was taken away from her birth. She's executed because eventually Elizabeth had no choice, I think, because all the Catholic plots are going around, but brought up with George Buchanan, one of the great Calvinists, all these Protestants, so all his tutors and teachers were on the opposite, and he considered himself somebody who understood both mentalities and could create a way of looking at peace. And so for him, the James Bible was about, it was the new word I learned, an irenicon. I hope I've said that right. If I haven't, can somebody correct me? Anyway, they are language that makes peace. In other words, the James Bible was meant to be having such rich language and have the rhythms and cadences in it and would open up things in a way so that both Catholics and Puritans could say, yes, we agree about this. So that the Bible was meant to be able to join them together so that they would have one book, not separate books on the Bible. Do you understand me? So, and it's an extraordinary, the actual story of the writing of the James Bible, which Adam Nicholson does, and the writing of King Lear, he does side by side. So it's a really good read. And it's a really good read because it really also really tries to explain all the ideas that were going around. One of the chief translators, a very holy religious man, there was this struggle between science and religion at this particular point. In other words, was the plague being delivered upon the people because they had all sinned badly? This is the religious point of view. They'd all sinned badly and it was just awful, you know. So this guy, one of the chief translators, put us together the James Bible, I forgot what his name was, should have stayed in London you know, and being with the people, because after all, he hadn't sinned. He was a holy and religious man. But he also knew that, in fact, the plague was caused by germs and by it spread through infections. So, of course, he bolted. So it's interesting to me that when one of the religious leaders was actually, you know, was he going to stay with the people because it was all about God's sin, which was what, I mean, you know, God delivering vengeance upon the people, which was the religious point of view, or science. He followed science and rescued his, you know, I'm not going to die of the plague. Interesting. Worthy of William Shakespeare. All right. So I just touched on, and I just want to do this, and then I'll stop talking, and maybe you can interact with me a bit about your own insights and thoughts about this. But when we look at the history of theatre, and especially the history of theatre through the Greeks and the Romans, I'm sorry, I'm doing Western theatre because that's what I know, and of course Shakespeare, in a way, comes out of Western theatre. And I don't know how this is true or not true of other cultures' theatre, but I'm willing to bet there's some parallels, because in the end our brains are the same. It means we're going to... So, but if you just look at that and you say, okay, where does theatre begin? And those of you that have done the month-long intensive, you all know the answers to this. I do a thing called function of the theatre. But if you just look at where it begins, most of us would say, oh, well, it begins with the story of the hunt of the woolly mammoth, you know, or the tiger hunt or whatever. Well, I say it's not just telling the story of the hunt of the woolly mammoth. It is enacting the hunt of the woolly mammoth. Because if you are going to train young people to go on the hunt of the woolly mammoth, you're going to create the whole situation in the way it happened, with somebody there as the woolly mammoth. You're going to do the charge of the woolly mammoth. And what you have to do if the woolly mammoth is charging you is stand your ground and throw the spear. What your emotions will tell you to do is get the fuck out of there. Right? But that does not get the woolly mammoth dead. So what you have to do is be in absolute fear of knowing what it's like to have the woolly mammoth charge you, stand your ground and throw the spear. And I am positing to you that theatre has not changed since then. When our theatre works the best is when you're going through all the visceral experiences of what goes on, and you're still going to breathe deeply, and you're going to tell it the way it is, and even as you go to your death up there on stage and you're fulfilling it, you're having all the emotions and feelings of it. It's actually an enactment. But it doesn't work for the audience if you don't go through your paces, and if you're dying, you really try and see what it's like to die, and if you're killing, you're really trying to viscerally understand what it's like to kill, and all the other things in between. I'm doing extreme examples. So I posit the idea that theatre begins with that, and then of course we get into all the religious rites of, oh, you know, our life is dominated by the rain gods because it's been raining for 4 days, and if it doesn't stop, it's just, you know, we don't know what to do, we're going to starve for the next God knows how long. So you start having a relationship with the rain god in order to have some kind of relationship with this rain that won't stop, and you'll build up your rites and rituals so that relationship is easier to deal with than non-relationship, just being helpless in the face of it. So you build your relationship with the rain god. Then if, you know, your dance to the rain god doesn't work and it's still raining, then you start looking around for the scapegoat, the sinner that you can kill, because obviously the rain god's going to pay you out, and so on and so forth. I began off, so we do the rites and rituals. We come to the theatre. You go to Greek theatre. The 10 tribes that made Athens have all got to learn to live together. We can't just, be our own tribe